Late night security guards or people who work the graveyard shift? What's the scariest paranormal thing you've experienced? I don't work the graveyard shift. I'm a teacher, but I've frequently stayed late during the winter months to try and catch up on work. Sometimes I don't leave until 7 o'clock-ish and by then it's pitch dark outside. Many times while thus alone I have heard children giggling. I've gone through the building, room by room, looking for the source since the idea of little kids locked in overnight is not pleasant. Never can find anyone. The doors and windows are locked and no sign of anyone outside. Asked around and it seems lots of fellow staff who have stayed later than normal have heard the laughter, as well as other sounds. Now when I hear the giggles I use my teacher voice and tell them to keep it down. Seems to work. So I'm fine with that. I'm a truck driver that works a midnight to noon shift. A few months back I was driving through the mountains in California at around 300 headed for Reno. Up ahead next to the road I noticed what I could only describe as an abomination. It stood on two legs and looked like a monster out of a nightmare. My blood turned cold and I felt fear overcome me as I approached it as it just stood there next to the road looking at me. After the longest 3 seconds of my life I realized it was a deer that was facing away from me with its body turned around so it could lick its own ass. I occasionally work the overnight shift as a security guard at a distribution warehouse. We're in a little shack out in the yard, checking trailers in and out. On more than one occasion I have caught the reflection of different people in the windows and glass doors of our shack. When I turn to look, there's no one there. Every inch of this area is under surveillance. No one ever shows up on video when I review the footage. I just ignore it these days. Counselor at a psychiatric hospital. I work a ton of night shift, and some spooky things tend to happen. You'll hear a door creaking open, and one of the patients leans out, exposing half his face. He's staring at me and whispering something I couldn't hear from that distance. Naturally I ask him if he is doing okay and if he needs something. He doesn't respond, but very slowly leans back into his room and closes the door. This repeated itself a few times during that night. It's a story I like to tell to people who ask me what I do for a living, because in hindsight I find it quite amusing. At the moment though, it freaked me the hell out. I posted this before in another thread. I supervise the cashier area in a casino and I've always worked grave. Back then we used to close a floor at 4 AM. I was working one night with an assistant and she had to run home for a bit about 5 AM. I was just finishing up paperwork so I didn't mind. I was standing up and my hair was kind of in my face. I was concentrating on my paperwork when for a split second I thought my hair had moved. But I realized that it was one of the cashier's swivel chairs slowly spinning. I stared at it until it stopped, kind of frozen with confusion as to how it happened. So I was feeling kind of creeped out so I sat down, figuring I'll just wait until my assistant got back. Then surveillance called and were like, "Did you see that?" We kind of laughed about it like WTF was that. I wish that video got saved but I don't know if they ever did save it because this was well over 10 years ago when they were still using tape that was wiped every 2 weeks. Definitely a WTF moment. Years ago I worked as a orderly in a small hospital on the night shift. Most of the work was just answering call lights and cleaning up messes. We had one room whose call light would go off seemingly on its own. Patients in the room would deny pushing it or it would go off when the room was empty. The story the older nurses told was of an elderly lady who spent a lot of time in that room before she passed and it's her asking for help. We all laughed about it and it was a long time running joke and whenever anything peculiar happened in that room it was just attributed to Vicky look for attention. 35 years have passed since that time and after a career I find myself working in the same hospital as a retirement job. Vicky's room has since been converted into a surgical area. Bright and shiny and new but whenever I pass that area and all of the lights are off I swear, out of the corner of my eye I can see someone standing in the PACU. I know it's an optical illusion but it still gives me shivers. I recently told this story to a friend who has worked here all this time, and now whenever I see her she swats me for telling her the story because she has started seeing Vicky out of the corner of her eye too. When I was younger I used to work as a security guard in the Musée du Louvre, where the Mona Lisa is. I worked the day shift. It was my part-time student job. And I heard some spooky stories from the night shift crew. There was this corridor with sword on both sides, and this security guy was walking by with his torchlight, and suddenly something pulled his jacket that made him almost fall. He turned around and nothing was there. He was screaming on his walkie-talkie and someone had to go up and bring him to the main room. They checked the cameras and saw that his jacket just got pulled mid-air. The next day when they reported to the chief of security, he told them to disregard this. And since that day they always do their rounds by 2 security guards. And there are many more stories from that place. We should not forget that many people died in the Musée du Louvre of violent death. I work at a 24-hour gas station in a small town. One night a seemingly drunk woman came in to use the washroom. As I went to unlock the door for her, she said it was cold out and touched the back of my neck and it felt like ice. This seemed odd because it wasn't that cold out. But I kept walking and got to the bathroom, and when I unlocked it and turned around she was gone. The next morning when the manager was in, I checked the cameras and they all went down for about 5 minutes when she was there. The cameras have never been down before unless there's a power outage. Stocking at Kmart. Lights were motion sensors. Randomly lights on the empty side of the store would go on. There were only 3 of us, so it's not like someone was there. Night shift nurse. Got a patient later at night. Got them settled and had a chat. Since it is a small town, the topic of people we both mutually knew came up, including one who recently passed away. Right as we are talking about the deceased, the shower in the unoccupied bathroom turned on. I of course went to investigate and found that the washcloth the patient had used earlier was hung to dry on the faucet, and gravity worked its magic and the shower turned on at a creepy time. Not me, but I worked with a family who cleaned offices overnight. During the summer they would bring their kids along. And their oldest kept pointing at something in the corner and asking why that man kept staring at him. They also experienced doors shutting and lights turning off. It may not have been paranormal, but it definitely freaked them out. I work in a building that's built on old state mental hospital property. We're next to a field. The entire building has cameras, so I'm able to see almost everything. Nothing too big. Lights flicker occasionally. See shapes in the corner of your vision. Hear footsteps but no one on camera. But my co-worker had a good one. She brought her 6-month-old dog into work and went on a walk with him in the field. She was probably just 50 feet from the building when her dog starts growling at nothing. About 10 seconds later, dog just books it to the building, leaving a trail of crap behind him. Co-worker runs after him and the dog is shivering. For a good while after the incident, dog would steer clear of men. He was just fine before this. But afterwards, every time a man got near, he would drop his ears and tail and hide. Worked overnight at a large corporate office. And one night while doing rounds, checking doors, stairways, boiler rooms, there is a long hallway, maybe 400 feet, with offices on both sides and a large window at the end. I'm walking down looking into the offices, and in the window on the door I see what looks to be someone standing behind me. I brush as my reflection and continue on. While walking down the hallway I look at my reflection in the large window and continue to see something that looks like I have a second head. I start to do my rounds a little faster, getting more creeped out. Then my partner in the camera room talks over the radio asking me if an office employee is walking with me. I noped out of there and asked for a transfer the next day. I was the 3rd shift receptionist to adorn that shared space with a 50s themed diner. Though the restaurant was empty, the jukebox would occasionally play the Scorpions' Rock You Like a Hurricane at full volume. Wasn't every night, but almost always around 3 AM. I used to work overnights at a halfway house. One time me and a co-worker were chatting and see on camera a guy walking down an alley behind our place. The alley was our building. and a brick building on the other side with no doors. We thought one of our residents were running away, pretty common. So I told my co-worker to keep watching the cameras and I'll see who it is. The cameras were on the same fixture. One looking north, one looking south. The only blind spot was right underneath of them. And about a 20-foot kind of like this, equals being cameras. V being blind spot, equals V equals. I walk out to see who it is. And there's no one in the LI. I radio back to my co-worker. And she says he disappeared off one camera and never appeared on the other one. So has to be in the blind spot. He wasn't. There are no doors in that blind spot or dumpsters, drains, anything. He literally just vanished. The only doors on their building were about 40 yards in each direction. Both on camera. He literally just vanished. I used to work in a funeral home. One time, the secretary calls me and asks me to come up front because there is a strange noise coming from the ceiling. I get there and after about a minute a really loud boom 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 comes from the ceiling. We both almost knocked each other over running out of that funeral home. Turns out there was a raccoon in the ceiling. But for about 30 minutes we were convinced that place was haunted. It was about 2 AM. And a church door was unlocked on one of our patrol accounts. We had to search and clear the whole church in the dark. They had a basement and we walked down about 25 steps and it was a huge white room with a little stage and podium and about 50 wooden chairs. Moving my gun light from one side of the room to the other was the worst feelings I ever felt. I just kept hoping please don't let anyone be sitting in a chair. Okay. This isn't paranormal in any sense of the word. But I just gotta get it off my chest. After graduating from music school, I took a graveyard shift type security job so I could practice my violin while being paid for it. It seemed perfect for me at the time. Practice for a bit less than an hour. And then walk around to see that all's well. Then, one night, there was a blizzard. And basically the city just shut down. I heard a knock at the front windows, which were floor to ceiling height. And there was a homeless man begging to come in out of the cold. To my shame, I turned my back to him and didn't let him in because I was afraid of losing my job. I wish I could say I was a minor hero that day. But I wasn't. I was craven. And I regret that incident to this day. I'm an overnight security guard. I work in a guardhouse watching cameras. At least at night. Sometimes spiders or other bugs crawl on the camera lenses and this huge black silhouette of something crawling appears on the bright monitors. Freaks me out. Luckily that's the scariest thing I've experienced out here. Two things. I worked till 4:30 AM and had to pass my best friend's mother's house on my way home. As I was passing her home I got hit with an overwhelming sense of foreboding. Seriously cold sweats shaking and sick to my stomach. I decided to stop in and check on her as the lights were on. She was having a heart attack. I worked in a huge used bookstore from 12 to 6 AM and was the only one in the building. I would often hear books being shuffled on the shelves or pages turning. I thought I was creepy but kinda cool too. I used to work the overnight awake shift at a group home up in Nunavut and one time I was watching a video on the black-eyed children and I heard knocking at the door. It was well past midnight on a weekday so I just sat there frozen in fear waiting for whoever it was to either knock again or walk away. I waited about 5 minutes and heard nothing. Not even the crunch of footsteps walking on snow. Went and checked around the doors and windows and there was no sight of anyone anywhere. Freaked me the duck out. I work nights in a large hospital and here's my story. I go into a patient room to do my job and while I'm in there, the water faucet turns on. It wasn't a motion activated faucet, but one with a lever. So I turn it off and finish what I'm doing. And tell the nurse on the way out. She tells me that things like that happen in that room all the time and that a lot of them have seen apparitions. Not real scary. But worked at a tiny full service test station back in the day that also had a mechanic garage. One night I heard a bunch of rattling from the pipes we used for exhaust in the garage. Ran to check and nothing. Happened again soon after and still nothing. Then right before I closed for the night I was at one end of the desk and the phone on the other end flew off its base and across the floor. Scared the shit out of me, but that's all. Worst part was I lived literally directly across the street as was creeped out for a while by it. I've got such a good one for this. About 1997 I got a job as a security guard and was immediately put on night shift for training. The front lobby of the office building I was working in was under renovations and basically just tarped off from the sidewalk. Part of my duties was to walk through the lobby to make sure no one was trespassing or ripping off anything from the area under construction. As I was walking through the area where they were installing a new revolving door, my eye caught some movement directly above me. I immediately pointed my flashlight straight up and saw a man in a suit hanging upside down. His face about 3 feet from mine and looking right at me with his eyes wide open. For just a few seconds I was more freaked out than I have ever been in my life. I was a bit jumpy to begin with as this was my first time as security on night shift, so my brain took a moment to process what was happening. It was my own stupid reflection and the shiny new mirrored steel finish of the not quite fully installed revolving door looking down at me. Never been so terrified in my entire life as I was in those 5 seconds. Dumbus. Dorman here. Had several moments that felt odd that I simply brushed off, like feeling like there was somebody behind me during a walkthrough or hearing weird sounds. What took the cake was when I felt something press against my face. Imagine the motion you make when you rub water on your face. But the sound skin makes from the friction. That's what I heard and felt. This was during a shift change. So a coworker saw how freaked out I was. I said I was just really tired. I didn't want to be that guy, so I never said anything. I worked night security for nearly a decade in the 90s and never saw anything paranormal. But did see 2 prominent stars in the sky close to each other just fade out and disappear. I was walking into a building and looking at the sky. I used to be into astronomy and saw 2 prominent stars that were just not right. So I stood there to look at them, and about a minute later one slowly fades out and disappears. Then the other one did too. There were no clouds. They had been stationary. Didn't move. It was strange. My mom works night shift at a hospital. She says that every time a patient says they see angels or flying babies, they die the next day. We had a great horned owl hang out on a sign 10 feet away from us through our entire lunch. Just sat there looking at us. Not paranormal, but kinda surreal. I used to live in a 2nd floor apartment and there was a crow that would sometimes sit on the street light across the road, staring at me through the window. One time I'd been drinking all day and on the way home from the pub I shouted at it to duck off. My neighbors probably thought I was ridiculous. One time late at night cleaning up the place I work, I found a flyer for some Christian thing on the ground, and when I looked at it, I heard this whisper that said, "You should pick that up," directly in my ear. I ended up sweeping it into a dustbin and never heard anything, so I guess I satisfied the ghost. Other times I just talk to myself or sing alone and ask the ghost to join me. But it never has responded. Oh well. It'd be cool to have a ghost friend to talk to at night. I used to work maintenance at a public school in Queens, NY. I got caught there overnight in a snowstorm once, and when I was just walking the building alone around 10 PM, I heard basketballs bouncing in the gym. That, in and of itself, scared the shit out of me, but because I was responsible for locking the building down, I had to go check it out. I walked into the gym and saw a ball roll out of the shadows, and I noped the duck right out of there. I couldn't leave, but I ran like a ducking itch and pulled down all those roll down security gates to the gym and slammed the padlocks on them. I then locked myself in the custodian's office and didn't leave that room for the rest of the completely sleepless night. A few years back, midnight security with hourly checks. Roof access had 2 doors on either side of the room to be checked locked to make sure no shenanigans occurred. Check 1. Locked. And good to go. Turn to the next. As I touched the handle of the 2nd door, I hear door number 1 behind me shut and lock click. I worked 9 PM to 5 AM watching over 1,000 acres of farmland. Yeah, one guy. Rare occasions two of us. We mainly patrolled the water pumps to make sure there wasn't people stealing copper from the motors. Anyways. One day some lights popped up in the field and slowly moved back and forth. I was about 0.5 miles from them but about a mile drive to where they were due to muddy fields. Anyways. As I got closer, they moved away from me. About 20 minutes of slow driving through slick muddy roads I came upon them. A tractor was tilling rows at 3 AM. I'm an idiot and the farmer just couldn't sleep so he went to work. So, I work at a place where the bathroom also has a lot of showers. I have to go to the bathroom at about 1 AM. And I stand outside the door when I hear PSH. PSH. PSH from the bathroom. As if the showers are going on and off constantly. I'm pretty spooked. But I really gotta go. So I enter and it immediately stops. I wait a bit. Hear nothing anymore. So I go. And as soon as I go it starts again. At this point, I just nope the duck out of there. Put the alarm of the hallway to the bathroom back on and stay holed up in the office until my replacement comes next morning at 7. Turns out that the showers have an automatic routine that happens at night to keep the pipes clean. Ninja edit. These replies are fun to read at my graveyard shift BTW.